He was one of the youngest and brightest music executives in the game, the man who helped shape the sound of Def Jam in the mid-2000s. Shakir Stewart wasn't just another suit behind a desk. He had an ear for hits, a heart for artists, and a vision that pushed Southern hip-hop into the mainstream. At the time of his rise, he worked closely with L.A. Reid and played key roles in the success of stars like Young Jeezy and Rick Ross. But in November 2008, everything changed. News broke that Shakir had taken his own life, a story that left friends, fans, and industry insiders in disbelief. How could someone at the top of his game just vanish like that? Was it stress, depression, or something far darker behind the scenes? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Shakir Stewart was born on the 12th of April, 1974, in Oakland, California, a city known for its soul, rhythm, and resistance. Growing up in the Bay Area during the 1980 and early 1990, young Shakir was surrounded by both the grit and creativity that shaped West Coast culture. His neighborhood wasn't the easiest place to grow up, but it was full of energy, the kind that built dreamers. From an early age, he showed a mix of hustle and heart that people around him couldn't ignore. His parents raised him to believe in education and self-belief. Friends said he was that kid who always had a plan, whether it was selling mixtapes, organizing school events, or finding new music before anyone else. Shakir wasn't just listening to songs. He was studying how they made people feel. The sound of Marvin Gaye, Earth, Wind and Fire, and early hip-hop pioneers like Run DMC played through his speakers. He would say things like, "Music moves people, man. It can change your whole mood." Even as a teenager, he understood the psychology of rhythm. Oakland was in a transition during those years, still recovering from the social movements of the 1970, but now becoming a hub of black culture and independence. Local artists, poets, and DJs were building something powerful. Shakir soaked it all in. He wasn't a rapper or producer. He was something rarer, a connector. He could see talent in people before they saw it in themselves. Teachers remembered him as confident but humble, with a sharp sense of leadership. After finishing high school, he headed to Atlanta to attend Morehouse College, a place that shaped many of Black America's greatest minds. It was a big move, but that's where his story really began to take shape. In Atlanta, he studied marketing, but his real education happened outside the classroom. The city in the mid-1990 was becoming a new capital for R&B and hip-hop. Shakir fell right into that wave. He threw small parties, promoted events, and started connecting with local artists. He had that charisma that drew people in, not flashy, but magnetic. People said he could walk into any room and have everyone laughing, talking, and planning something big within minutes. He wasn't trying to be famous. He wanted to build something lasting. That's what set him apart. By the time he graduated from Morehouse, he wasn't just another student with a degree. He was already plugged into Atlanta's underground music scene. That energy, that grind, that belief that you can make something out of nothing, that was pure Oakland spirit running through him. Shakir was about to take that drive and flip it into a career that would shake the entire industry. At Morehouse, Shakir Stewart wasn't just hitting the books, he was building a network before most people even understood what that meant. In the early 1990s, Atlanta was buzzing. LaFace Records, run by L.A. Reid and Babyface, was turning the city into the new Motown of the South. TLC, Tony Braxton, and Outkast were breaking barriers, and Shakir wanted to be right in the middle of it all. While his classmates were focused on business plans or graduation parties, Shakir was connecting with DJs, producers, and promoters. He helped organize local events and talent showcases, the kind of nights where unknown artists could perform in front of industry people. That was his zone. He didn't need to rap or sing. His talent was spotting potential. As one of his friends later said, "Shake had that ear, man. He could tell who was next before anyone else even heard the record." Oh, during college, he met Tony Draper, founder of Suave House Records, the label behind 8 Ball and MJG and other Southern rap pioneers. Draper saw something in the young student, a sharp mind, natural leadership, and an unshakable belief in Southern music. Shakir began helping Draper scout new talent. and that became his first real taste of the music business. He was young, confident, and learning fast. By the mid-1990, Shakir had made a name for himself among Atlanta's music insiders. He worked with Noontime Music, an influential production company that developed songwriters and producers. Noontime was like a creative family, the place where people like Jazzy Faw, Brian Michael Cox, and Jonta Austin crafted the sound that defined a generation of R&B hits. Shakir's role wasn't about fame, it was about connecting the dots. He had the vision to bring artists, producers, and labels together, a talent that would later make him one of the most respected executives in the industry. Everyone around him noticed his energy. He was described as the guy who never stopped moving. If someone needed advice, he'd take the call. If a deal was falling apart, he'd find a way to fix it. His motto was simple: work hard, stay loyal, and don't burn bridges. And that attitude paid off. Through his connections at Noontime, he built relationships with some of the biggest names in the business, including L.A. Reid, who would later play a huge role in his career. Shakir wasn't chasing clout. He was earning respect, one handshake at a time. Friends remember him walking into rooms full of powerful executives and acting like he belonged there, not cocky, just confident. He carried that Oakland toughness and Morehouse polish wherever he went. By his late 20s, he wasn't just a kid from the Bay. He was becoming a name whispered in executive offices, the guy who could find the next big star. The boy from Oakland had turned himself into one of the most promising young executives in Atlanta, and soon, the world was about to know his name. By the late 1990s, Shakir Stewart had become one of Atlanta's most connected young executives, and that's saying a lot in a city overflowing with talent. After graduating from Morehouse, he took everything he learned in those college years and poured it into his professional grind. His first big move came when he joined Noontime Music, a powerhouse incubator that specialized in discovering and developing new producers and songwriters. At Noontime, Shakir wasn't just sitting behind a desk. He was out there scouting, listening, and building. He became the middleman between creativity and opportunity. Artists trusted his word because he didn't speak like an executive, he spoke like one of them. He'd show up in the studio, sit back in the chair, and really listen. "That's the one," he'd say when he heard something special. And 9 times out of 10, he was right. One of Shakir's earliest successes was helping bridge the gap between Atlanta's underground scene and the mainstream industry. He was instrumental in connecting artists to record deals, many of whom would later become household names. When Kiara, Beyoncé, and Blue Cantrell began emerging, Shakir was one of the early voices encouraging executives to take the Atlanta sound seriously. He saw the South not as a trend, but as the new heartbeat of hip-hop and R&B. As his reputation grew, so did his opportunities. Around the early 2000s, Shakir joined Hitco Music Publishing, the company founded by L.A. Reid. That relationship changed everything. L.A. Reid saw in Shakir the same hunger he once had, a mix of business acumen and street intuition. Reid gave him room to move, and Shakir ran with it. His biggest career jump came when he was brought into Def Jam Records, the legendary label that had shaped generations of hip-hop. For Shakir, this was the big leagues, the place where Jay-Z, LL Cool J, and DMX had built their legacies. But instead of being intimidated, he came in ready to make history. He quickly became known as the guy who could spot stars before anyone else. When young Jeezy was bubbling in Atlanta, Shakir saw potential others missed. He fought for him, helped shape his deal, and introduced him to the world. Go Crazy, Soul Survivor, and Jeezy's debut album Let's Get It, Thug Motivation 101 became proof that Shakir's ear was pure gold. He also played a key role in signing Rick Ross, another artist who would go on to become a major name in hip-hop. That move alone earned Shakir massive respect inside Def Jam and across the industry. He wasn't just signing artists, he was building careers, shaping the entire sound of mid-2000 hip-hop. People who worked with him said he carried himself with grace and focus. He could walk into a chaotic studio session and instantly bring calm. He could sit in an executive boardroom full of egos and somehow make everyone feel heard. That balance between street credibility and corporate discipline was rare. By his early 30s, Shakir Stewart wasn't just rising, he was soaring. From Oakland streets to Def Jam's boardroom, he had earned every bit of respect he got. But as his influence grew, so did the attention, and not all of it was good. By the time Shakir Stewart turned 30, he was already living the kind of success story most people only dream about. From Oakland to Atlanta to New York City, every move he made felt calculated, intentional, and fueled by passion. Inside Def Jam, his name carried weight. People didn't just see him as another executive, they saw him as the future. His relationship with L.A. Reid grew stronger. Reid trusted his instincts and gave him the kind of freedom that few young executives ever get. Shakir wasn't afraid to take risks. When he believed in an artist, he would go all in sometimes against the advice of the board. He once said, "If it moves the culture, I don't care how risky it looks. Let's make it happen." That confidence, that conviction, made people rally around him. It wasn't long before Jay-Z, then the president of Def Jam, took notice. The two hit it off instantly, both men sharp, business-minded, and deeply connected to the streets. Jay saw Shakir as someone who understood both the creative and corporate sides of the game. Whenever Shakir brought a new artist or idea to the table, Jay listened. That mutual respect opened doors that would define the next phase of Shakir's career. In those years, Def Jam was going through a transformation. The label was competing with new digital platforms, shifting audiences, and changing sounds. Shakir became a bridge between the old school and the new wave. He helped bring in a younger roster of talent that kept Def Jam relevant while staying true to its roots. His colleagues described him as the heartbeat of the building. Artists loved him because he genuinely cared. He'd check in on them, talk about their mental health, their goals, their families. He wasn't just trying to make hits, he was trying to make legends. One artist recalled, "Shake didn't talk numbers first, he talked about your purpose. That's rare in this business. Bleu." But success also brought pressure. The higher he climbed, the more he had to navigate politics, jealousy, and competition. Corporate music is a battlefield, and not everyone wanted to see a young, confident black executive rise so fast. Rumors started floating around, whispers about rivalries, tension, and deals gone sour. Shakir handled it the way he always did, with calm professionalism. He smiled, kept working, and let the results speak. By 2008, he was appointed Executive Vice President of Def Jam Recordings, one of the most prestigious titles in the industry. It was a major milestone, proof that talent, integrity, and hard work could still win. He was on top of the world, a respected executive, a family man, and a leader in an industry that often chews people up and spits them out. But behind that success, there were cracks forming, the kind you can't always see from the outside. Some say he seemed more withdrawn in those last months, like something was weighing heavy on him. Others thought he was just tired from years of grinding. Whatever it was, his world was changing fast, and soon the bright light that had risen so high was about to face its darkest chapter. In 2008, Shakir Stewart reached a milestone that very few ever dreamed of. He was officially named Executive Vice President of Def Jam Recordings, a title that symbolized not just power, but legacy. For a young black executive from Oakland, this was monumental. Def Jam wasn't just any label, it was the house that built hip-hop's history. And now, one of the culture's own was sitting at the top. When the news broke, the industry celebrated. Colleagues praised his vision. Artists flooded him with congratulations. Magazines called him the next big executive voice of the new generation. It was a victory not only for Shakir, but for every kid who came from humble beginnings and dreamed of changing the game. He had become proof that you could make it your way through integrity, passion, and love for the music. Shakir's leadership style was different. He wasn't the kind of executive who ruled by fear or numbers. He ruled by connection. He'd walk into a meeting, dap everyone up, crack a joke, and instantly shift the energy. He made people feel seen, from the biggest artist to the quietest intern. He knew everyone's name, and he remembered their stories. "Man, that's how you build loyalty," one of his colleagues said later. Shake didn't need to demand respect, he earned it. Under his leadership, Def Jam started to feel alive again. Shakir brought in new ideas, new producers, and pushed for projects that reflected the streets, not just the charts. He wanted the label to keep its soul while evolving with the times. He also mentored younger executives, reminding them that this business wasn't just about power, it was about purpose. But at the same time, with every success came a new layer of scrutiny. The higher you rise, the more eyes watch you. And in 2008, Def Jam was in a complicated era. Jay-Z had recently stepped down as president, and industry politics were shifting fast. There were power struggles, rumors, and quiet rivalries over who would control the label's next direction. Shakir, now one of the youngest executives in the room, had to move carefully. Still, those who knew him said he never lost his optimism. He was proud but grounded, still the same guy from Oakland with big dreams. When he spoke at events, he talked about giving opportunities to the next generation. "We can't just talk about change," he'd say. "We gotta be the change." But behind the smiles, some noticed a subtle change in him. Friends said he seemed a little more tense, a little quieter. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, as some later believed, it was something else, something darker happening behind the scenes. Whatever it was, 2008 should have been his victory lap, the year everything came together. Instead, it became the year everything fell apart. Shakir Stewart was standing at the height of his power, admired, respected, and unstoppable, until whispers began to spread through the industry, whispers that would soon turn celebration into shock. Success in the music industry always comes with noise, and by 2008, the noise around Shakir Stewart was getting louder. On paper, he had everything: the title, the respect, the money, and a seat at the table that so many had fought to reach. But in private, things were becoming complicated. When you rise too fast in an industry built on egos, it can feel like everyone either wants to be you or wants to take you down. Rumors started circulating not about his work ethic, but about his relationships and loyalty. The industry thrives on whispers, and Shakir, now one of the youngest heavyweights, was suddenly in the middle of multiple power circles. He was close to L.A. Reid, his longtime mentor, but he also had growing influence among artists connected to Sean Diddy Combs, who dominated the East Coast scene. Some say their relationship was friendly, others say it turned tense as Shakir's profile began to rise. Around that time, Kim Porter, Diddy's longtime partner and mother of his children, was also said to be connected to Shakir socially. Rumors of jealousy and rivalry between powerful men started to swirl. To be clear, nothing was ever proven, and many of these stories remain speculative. But in the cutthroat world of music business, perception can be just as dangerous as truth. People who knew Shakir say he wasn't the type to get caught up in gossip. He kept his head down and focused on work. But that didn't stop the whispers. Industry insiders later recalled hearing about tension at the top, executive feuds, and personal matters being used as leverage. To outsiders, it all sounded like the usual drama of the entertainment world. To those inside, it felt like something much deeper, a storm quietly brewing. Def Jam was going through leadership shifts, and corporate politics were at an all-time high. Jay-Z had left L.A. Reid was splitting his attention between projects, and the label was under pressure to stay profitable. Shakir was now the face of the new era, young, talented, outspoken, and fearless. That made him both admired and targeted. He was changing the sound of hip-hop, pushing Southern voices to the front, and breaking down old hierarchies. That kind of disruption doesn't always make you popular in executive boardroom. Colleagues later said that despite the pressure, Shakir carried himself with the same calm confidence as always. He showed up sharp, smiled through it, and kept delivering results. But friends noticed subtle shifts, sleepless nights, quiet moments, maybe even paranoia. Some said he started acting different, not in a dramatic way, but in small, worrying details. He seemed more guarded, as if he knew something was coming. Still, no one imagined what would happen next. Shakir was planning new projects, discussing artist development, and making long-term business moves just days before tragedy struck. He had too much ahead of him, too much left to build. But in an industry where success can turn into isolation overnight, no one truly knows what pressures lie behind the closed doors of power. For Shakir Stewart, those doors were about to close forever, and the world would be left with more questions than answers. By the fall of 2008, Shakir Stewart was at the height of his career. Executive Vice President at Def Jam, respected across the industry, admired by artists, and loved by friends. But behind the confidence and polished suits, something had begun to shift. The man once known for his infectious optimism was now showing quiet signs of distress. Friends later recalled that Shakir had seemed different in those final months. Not sad exactly, but tense, distant, distracted. One close friend said he'd start talking about something big, then stop himself like he didn't want to say too much. Others noticed he was checking over his shoulder more often, watching his surroundings, almost as if he felt he was being followed. To outsiders, that sounded paranoid. But to people who knew the music industry, it didn't seem far-fetched. Shakir had risen fast, stepped into major executive circles, and built relationships with some of the most powerful and controversial figures in the business. In that world, secrets are currency, and some secrets can ruin careers. In the months before his death, there were whispers that Shakir was dealing with extreme pressure, both professional and personal. He was juggling massive responsibilities at Def Jam, dealing with corporate restructuring, and facing rumors about his private life. At the same time, the financial crisis of 2008 was hitting hard. Labels were cutting budgets, artists were panicking, and executives were under more scrutiny than ever. For someone like Shakir, who prided himself on loyalty and results, the stress was immense. But many of his friends don't buy the narrative of stress and depression. They remember a man still planning for the future. He had just been talking about expanding into film and launching a new music venture. He told one friend, "I'm not done yet. I'm just getting started." In early October 2008, those close to him began noticing a more visible change. Some say he looked sleep-deprived. Others say he was jumpy, nervous. A few accounts mentioned that he believed people were trying to undermine him. Whether it was industry politics or something more personal, no one knows for sure. According to several reports, Shakir had been reaching out to friends in the weeks leading up to his death, offering encouragement, checking in almost as if he wanted to make sure everyone was good. One artist later said, "He called me out of nowhere, just to tell me to keep going." That was Shake always giving energy, even when he didn't have much left. Then there were the darker rumors, the ones that would surface online years later. Allegations that he was being blackmailed. Some said it involved personal footage, others claimed it was business-related. None of it was ever proven, but those stories grew louder after his death. People began connecting dots between his sudden behavior changes, the industry conflicts, and his powerful connections. On the personal side, Shakir was engaged and had 2 young children. He loved his family deeply, and that's one of the reasons his friends have always questioned the suicide explanation. He wasn't a man trying to escape life, he was a man trying to protect it. As October turned into November, things took a darker tone. Shakir reportedly told a few people he felt overwhelmed, but didn't explain why. Some of his associates said he had recently clashed with certain industry figures. Others said he'd been receiving strange messages. Again, none of this was ever confirmed, but the timing was chilling. One thing everyone agrees on: he was not acting like someone preparing to die. He was making future plans, booking meetings, talking about Christmas with his kids. Then suddenly silence. On the 1st of November 2008, the world of hip-hop would receive news that made no sense. The official statement would say one thing, but those who truly knew Shakir Stewart the man, not just the executive, were already shaking their heads saying, "Nah, that don't add up." The man who had lifted so many others was now gone, and the questions were only beginning. The 1st of November 2008. The news broke quietly at first, then spread like wildfire through the music world. Shakir Stewart was dead. The report said he had taken his own life at his home in Atlanta. He was just 34 years old. For those who loved him, the headline felt impossible. For those who worked with him, it made no sense at all. The man they'd spoken to days earlier was upbeat, planning, laughing, talking about the future. Within hours, disbelief turned into grief, and grief quickly turned into suspicion. Calls flew between artists, executives, and friends. "Did you hear? That can't be right. There's no way Shake did that to himself." The entire industry froze. His fiancée, Michelle Rivers, and his family were devastated. They released a brief statement asking for privacy and called Shakir a man of integrity, a devoted father, and a friend to many. It was simple, dignified, and heartbreakingly calm, but it didn't answer the question that was haunting everyone. Why? Close friends said they had spoken to him the day before. He had been talking about future projects and how proud he was of what he'd achieved. One producer recalled, He was fine, man. Like, really fine. We were laughing. He said he was looking forward to a break, spending time with his kids. None of this fits. Police ruled the death a suicide by gunshot, and that was the official story. But the public wasn't convinced. Online forums and message boards began filling with theories. People pointed out inconsistencies, the lack of a suicide note, the timing, the behavior leading up to it. Some said he had seemed scared in the days before, not sad. Others mentioned the mysterious text message he reportedly received that night, something no one outside law enforcement ever saw. Even those inside the industry whispered that something didn't add up. "It's always the same pattern," one executive told Vibe magazine at the time. "A black man rises too high, too fast, and then suddenly he's gone." There were also rumors about professional conflicts. Shakir was said to be frustrated with label politics, and there was speculation that internal tensions had reached a breaking point. Some blamed corporate stress. Others, more conspiratorial, connected his death to the darker undercurrents of the entertainment world, talk of control, blackmail, and intimidation. While none of it was ever proven, the sheer amount of speculation showed how deeply people distrusted the official version of events. Years later, artists and colleagues still bring up his name with a mix of admiration and pain. Many insist that Shakir was not the type to give up. He had fought his way through too much from Oakland to Def Jam to simply stop fighting. One of his friends said, "Shake had that survivor energy. Even when things got rough, he'd say, 'Man, we'll figure it out.'" That's who he was. Tributes poured in from across the country. Young Jeezy, Rick Ross, and others publicly mourned him. L.A. Reid called him one of the most talented and driven executives I've ever worked with. Even years later, when interviews touched on his name, people's voices would soften. His absence was a wound that never fully healed. But as time passed, something eerie lingered, the sense that the truth was never fully told. Every few years, as scandals and lawsuits surfaced involving figures tied to that same circle, Shakir's name would come up again. People would say, "Remember Shake? Something wasn't right about that." To this day, fans still post messages on social media, "Justice for Shakir Stewart. He didn't do it. Reopen the case." And with recent events surrounding others in that same orbit, those calls have grown louder than ever. For his family, the pain remains personal and sacred. For the culture, his death became a symbol, a reminder of how fragile success can be when power, politics, and secrets mix in the music industry. One thing is certain: Shakir Stewart's story didn't end on the 1st of November 2008. It just became the beginning of a mystery that still echoes through the halls of hip-hop. Even after his passing, Shakir Stewart's influence continued to ripple through the music industry. He might not have been a performer, but his fingerprints were all over the sound of a generation. Every time a Jeezy anthem shook the speakers or a Rick Ross verse echoed through the radio, a piece of Shakir's legacy lived on. He was the quiet architect behind the scenes, the one who believed in artists before the world did. Colleagues described him as a bridge builder. He didn't just sign talent, he built communities. Under his watch, Def Jam regained its pulse. He pushed Southern hip-hop into the mainstream at a time when it was still being dismissed by many East Coast purists. That move reshaped the industry forever. Without people like Shakir, the rise of artists from Atlanta, Miami, and Houston might not have hit the same cultural peak. Artists who knew him often credit him for their confidence and creative freedom. Young Jeezy once said in an interview that Shakir believed in me when others thought I was too raw. Rick Ross mentioned that Shakir was one of the first execs who treated him like an equal, not just another rapper trying to get signed. That kind of respect was rare, and it built loyalty that money couldn't buy. Within Def Jam, his mentorship left a deep imprint. Several younger executives went on to prominent positions in the industry, carrying his lessons forward, lessons about integrity, empathy, and staying grounded. One of them recalled, "Shake told me, 'Don't chase the hit, chase the truth.' That line stuck with me forever." Even outside of music, Shakir's story inspired countless people. In Oakland and Atlanta, schools and organizations have mentioned his name in programs teaching business, entrepreneurship, and leadership. His life showed that success didn't have to come from privilege or connections, it could come from vision and relentless drive. Over the years, documentaries, blog posts, and tribute videos have tried to piece together who he really was. Most of them agree on one thing: Shakir Stewart was underrated, criminally underrated. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't chase the spotlight. But he was the kind of man who made stars shine brighter. The pain of his death still lingers, but so does his example. His story became a rallying cry for many who felt overlooked or underestimated in their own careers. Every time an artist fights to maintain creative control, or a young executive refuses to compromise their integrity, they're following the path Shakir laid down. And then there's the question of justice, the conversation that never seems to fade. In recent years, as the music industry has faced a reckoning with corruption and exploitation, Shakir's name has resurfaced again and again. People are finally starting to ask the hard questions that were brushed aside in 2008. Whether the truth ever comes out or not, one thing is clear. He deserves to be remembered not for how he died, but for how he lived. He was a visionary, a connector, a man who turned opportunity into legacy. He built bridges across sound, culture, and time. And though the industry moves fast and memories fade, real ones like Shakir Stewart never disappear. They live through the rhythm, through the records, through the lives they touched. He may have been gone too soon, but his blueprint, it's still running through the game. He was young, gifted, and respected, a man who climbed from the streets of Oakland to the top floor of Def Jam's headquarters. But like so many stories in the music industry, Shakir Stewart's journey ended far too soon. His name, once printed on platinum records and award lists, became a whisper, followed by a question that still haunts the culture. What really happened? When people look back on his life now, they don't just see an executive, they see a symbol. Shakir represented everything that was right about the business: passion, loyalty, and vision. But his story also exposed everything that's wrong with it: the pressure, the politics, and the silence that follows tragedy. Friends say that if Shakir were still here, he'd be mentoring new talent, pushing for more fairness in the industry, and making sure artists understood their power. That was his real gift, not the deals or the titles, but his ability to make people believe in themselves. Every so often his name trends online again. Sometimes it's after a new documentary drops, sometimes after another scandal hits the headlines. And each time the same comments appear: "Justice for Shakir. He didn't do it." We still remember. Those aren't just internet theories, they're echoes of a collective grief that never found closure. Maybe we'll never know the full story of what happened behind those closed doors in 2008. Maybe the truth is buried deep under years of secrets and silence. But what we do know is this: Shakir Stewart mattered. His life, his work, and his energy changed the landscape of hip-hop, and no rumor or tragedy can erase that. It's crazy how someone can give so much to the world, yet leave with so many questions unanswered. That's the painful beauty of stories like his. They remind us how fragile success really is. Behind the awards, the headlines, and the suits, there was just a man trying to make a difference. So tonight, as we remember Shakir Stewart, let's not focus on how he died, but how he lived. Let's remember the music he helped bring to life, the people he inspired, and the doors he kicked open for others. Because maybe that's the real legacy: not fame, not fortune, but the impact you leave behind when you're gone. Do you believe Shakir really took his own life? Or was there something more, something darker, something that the world still refuses to face? Drop A in the comments if you believe his story deserves the truth. Rest in power, Shakir Stewart. Your light may have faded too soon, but your legacy still shines.